Hello, my name's Rick Tynan and I'm a staff member at Liverpool John Moores University. I'm also following the PhD by publication route. Thank you for your interest in this presentation entitled The COVID-19 Generation, Newly Qualified Teacher and Initial Teacher Education Trainee Self-Efficacy. This reports research conducted by myself and Dr. Andrea Malaburn, who is also a staff member at LJMU. Apologies for the information and text dense nature of the slides. There's a lot to report. If I'm rushing through things and you want to read something more closely, please feel free to pause. If that blurs the slides, then there is a PDF version of the PowerPoint available should you want to follow something up that you are interested in. So why did we do the research? We felt the need to monitor, in order to give support, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the participants in our initial teacher education programs. 2 consecutive cohorts have now been disrupted by the social distancing measures, the tiers, the school closures, the risk assessment requirements that go along with the pandemic in school. As you might expect during a pandemic, we opted for an online survey approach, and we opted for looking at teacher confidence in their ability to do their job or their self-efficacy. We also needed to be quite quick, and we also needed to be able to get ethical approval easily. So we opted to use pre-validated items from questionnaires that had already been used in research into teacher self-efficacy. The timings of the survey were June 2020 and November 2021. The June 2020 survey was aimed at NQTs who had just been successful on their ITE programs and were about to start their first post in their NQT year, newly qualified teacher year. The November survey was aimed at our new cohort of initial teacher education trainees as they arrived in September and got towards the end of their first term on school experience placement. They were all placed and they all went on school experience placement, but these placements obviously were very different for different trainees as the effects of the pandemic were felt differently in different schools. The initial survey that we gave to the NQTs and the trainees focused on their perspective and their confidence in various areas of teacher competency. A follow-up survey aimed at the NQTs later on in the year is intended to add another section which looks at teacher self-efficacy in terms of organisation and peer expectations on their performance. The structure of the survey was fairly simple and didn't take long to complete. The first part gathered demographic information from the respondents, and the second part asked them about their perceptions of self-efficacy, their confidence to do various teaching competencies in 3 categories: pedagogy, classroom management and student engagement. They were asked to give themselves a score between 0 and 10, where 0 was no confidence at all and 10 was highly confident, on 8 items to do with each category, and these were followed by an open response box. The analysis of the data was mainly quantitative, although the open response box gives us the opportunity to do thematic analysis on those responses later. Some of them are reported later in the presentation verbatim so that you can get a flavour of the responses that we were getting. The ethics were simple. The surveys qualified for LJMU minimal risk registration. They were anonymous. There was an information sheet, so it was informed consent, and the consent was implied by returning the completed survey. The next few slides show the comparative demographic information from the two surveys, and you can see that we got a high response from NQTs as they exited the programme. We've had a slightly lower response from the ITEs after their first term. We are mainly getting secondary respondents, although the number of primary respondents went up for the ITE survey. And this doesn't really reflect the comparative numbers that could have responded. We had more female respondents and we had more younger respondents. This isn't the same as the secondary primary response rates, though, in that generally that reflects the general demographics of recruitment to the programs concerned. We had respondents covering the full range of subjects in both surveys, although in the NQT survey the core subjects were very well represented, whereas in the ITE first term survey the well represented subjects tend to be those where you might expect there was more challenges due to social distancing and risk assessment, in other words the practical subjects. This slide gives you an indication of what happened to the NQTs after the lockdown occurred and their involvement with school. And you can see that most of them were able to keep in contact with people in school and to take part in the school's work and support the school. The ITE first term survey shows that there's been a profound impact on training and on initial teacher education through school experience, and you can see that respondents had been directly and indirectly affected by COVID itself and by the social distancing, risk assessment and other measures necessary to keep the schools open in the different tiers. The next two sections in the presentation set out the findings from the two surveys separately. And I'm not going to spend too much time on each slide, or I'll just explain what they are really and leave people to read the information for themselves if it's of interest. This slide actually sets out the average efficacy scores for each of the categories that we asked about. And the main finding, of course, for the NQTs were that they were very confident going into their first term of teaching, and there wasn't any real significant difference between the average efficacy rankings. The rank order is quite interesting because you'll see later it's the same rank order that the trainees placed these categories in independently. When we look at the mean efficacy scores, there's no differences really between groups within the cohort. They're the same by gender and by primary or secondary phase. And also using correlation coefficient, we can do a rank order correlation coefficient on the 8 items and the scores within each category, and they were found to correlate highly in both the secondary and the primary respondents. The next three slides will give some of the open responses and also just show up some of the individual items in the survey which were above or below average. So brown means that these were things that tended to be rated under the average score in that category. Green will mean that they were rated higher than the average score for the category, and blue means they're in the middle there. I won't comment on the actual content of these slides too much at this stage. I'd rather leave it till the summary at the end. So Looking at the ITE trainee survey, there's a summary there of the effect of the pandemic on their training and their ITE programme. The ITE trainees at the end of their first term are still fairly confident in the 3 efficacy areas, but perhaps not surprisingly, they're much less confident than the NQTs were at the end of their course. And also they are showing some significant differences between their scores for pedagogy and engagement and classroom management. So classroom management, they're ranking higher, and it's significantly higher than the other 2. And again, we're turning up in the ITE trainee survey some differences by gender and some differences by phase. So in terms of the items that were within the pedagogy efficacy category, there is little correlation between the order of the items that the average scores indicated for secondary or primary. And again, let's not dwell on these slides too much in the time that we've got. Please, read them if you're interested. But these are the over average, under average, and average scoring statements. Classroom management and student engagement. There are quite a few similarities which are remarkable between the responses of the ITE trainees and the NQTs, considering that they've never met each other, and they agree on the rank order of the levels of confidence in the efficacy areas, and some of the individual items they have ranked above or below average similarly. So how confident might we be in our findings? The limitation of this approach, of course, is that we are dealing with a non-random convenience sample, not systematic, not representative. However, we did get 33% response from the NQT cohort, and that allows us to make some cautious recommendations based on those findings. And the 16% response rate that we got from the ITE trainees still means that we can identify areas that are worthy of further research and to see if they are generally areas that we might need to give support in. Overall, our NQT respondents demonstrated great confidence in all the 3 areas that we asked them about, and this perhaps reflects that their programme was interrupted partway through and they'd had sufficient time on school experience placement to bolster their confidence. We don't know how that has changed yet, and we can't gauge how institutional or peer aspects of self-efficacy have contributed to any possible changes. We have issued a survey that was amended to include these, but its returns are low at the moment. So this slide will tell you where we might think that NQTs were slightly less confident. So going forward, these are the things that we would be looking for to help support our alumni in their NQT schools. The trainees, still positive in outlook, had significantly less confidence and therefore may need more support. This slide specifically addresses the area where that support might be focused, but this needs further investigation before resources are committed because of the low response on that particular survey.